On Friday, a draft decision on changes to Hong Kong's electoral system was submitted to the National People's Congress for deliberation. Among them, Patriots administering Hong Kong's is considered to be a key part of that. What are the changes and why are they being made? To discuss the issue, I'm joined via satellite by Dr. Timothy Kurzweil, Research Fellow at Advanced Institute of Global and Contemporary China Studies from Chinese University of Hong Kong, He Jing, attorney at GEN law firm, Joseph Gregory Mahoney, Professor of Politics at East China Normal University, and via Skype by Huang Jin, Dean of the Institute of International and Regional Studies at Beijing Language and Culture University. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. A draft decision on changing the electoral system of Hong Kong's special administrative region was submitted Friday, as we said, to the 4th annual session of the 13th National People's Congress for deliberation. So, Professor Huang Jin, can you tell us why Hong Kong's electoral system needs to be changed now?
Because this system was actually inherited from the colonial period. It is not really fit into the what China trying to, implement the so-called one country and the two system, and especially given the chaos and the turmoil last year, it is time to improve the system so that it will fit in the basic law and China's constitution.
Mm-hmm. Well, Timothy, as Huang Jin mentioned, over the past couple of years, we see this riot, violent protests and chaos in Hong Kong. I mean, you were in Hong Kong and you are in Hong Kong now. Some say the intransigence and fanaticism of the anti-government movement or opposition have left Beijing without any choice but to do something to improve the electoral system. Is that the case?
Well, I think we saw in 2019 with the widespread violence and disturbance just what some of the opposition figures were capable of when it came to using the political system as it was for very destabilizing ends. But I think worse than that is that even after the violence largely subsided and even after the introduction of the national security law, there were still some opposition strategists who were conspiring to destabilize the political system further, freeze the government of Hong Kong, and effectively prevent Hong Kong from being governable through a strategy called mutually assured destruction. So I think in a lot of ways that was one of the catalysts for the improvement of the system and to make sure that these types of people could be vetted out of the political system here.
Mm-hmm. Well, Wang Chen, the vice chairman of the NPC Standing Committee, presented the document of the decision to the Congress. Let's take a look.
继续由选举委员会选举产生行政长官。
The chief executive will continue to be elected by the election committee. The election committee will be entrusted with the new function of electing a relatively large share of legislative council members and directly participating in the nomination of all candidates for the legislative council. Through the election committee, balanced and orderly political participation will be expanded and broader representation ensured in Hong Kong society. Relevant elements of the election will be adjusted as appropriate, and a mechanism of qualification review will be established throughout the entire process. This design is aimed at forming a new democratic electoral system suited to Hong Kong's realities and with Hong Kong characteristics.
Well, He Jing, you are from the GEN law firm. You are in the study of law in China, obviously. What is the legal basis for the improving of the electoral system, and these either basic law or the national constitution?
Of course, the legal basis is constitutional law of China and also the basic law. The basic law has the full text, the formal body, and also the annex. According to what we have heard, that I think this time the improvement takes a very careful approach. It's really about the Annex 1 and 2 of the basic law, which deal with the election of a chief executive and the LegCo. So I think that's the approach. It's really about how the system should be changed in terms of whether the district council member should be automatically be part of the election committee, And so that's the one fundamental part of it. And according to some press report from Hong Kong, like South China Morning Post, maybe the number of members of the election committee will also increase. But the statute basis is definitely the constitutional law and the basic law.
Mm-hmm. Well, later next week, the details will be out, hopefully. And according to Reuters analysis, Beijing's revision of Hong Kong's electoral system is the end of the road for Hong Kong's democratic, dream. So, Professor Mahoney, how do you view the statement or this kind of response? Pretty pessimistic, let's say.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of points. First, the dream had really become a nightmare, and I think that in so much as that's the case, certainly changes had to be made. I think the other thing is there wasn't very much democracy during the British rule. There hasn't been a whole lot of democracy since, and if we're being really honest, the changes that are being put in place now, depending on your position, they either marginally improve or marginally decrease democracy. It's really making a lot out of something, and I think it's really telling that the United States, with all the problems the United States has, that it has chosen this as a focal point for its engagement with China. That said, I think the thing we have to recall is that in the competitive nation-state system, which was not invented by China, but China was forced into in the last century, the basic point is that sovereignty is the foundation for democracy. And it was really sovereignty that was increasingly at risk in Hong Kong in ways that not only undermined China, but ran fundamentally contrary to the one country, two system principle.
Mm-hmm. That's a key point, the one country sovereignty of China. Wang Chen, the vice chairman of the NPC Standing Committee, also highlights the principle of Patriots administering Hong Kong as part of the policy of one country, two systems. So Timothy, what does the principle mean, and why does it need to be emphasized, the patriotism over there?
Well, I think it needs to be emphasized because of the strange reality that's existed recently in Hong Kong, where it's possible to use the political system as a way of undermining the political system itself. But if we look historically or globally at the idea of patriotism, what we usually think of as a patriot is somebody who's willing to make major sacrifices in the cause of their country's success or in its defense. By contrast, what we're seeing here is it's a fairly low standard of patriotism that's being expected, which is basically that when you contest government, when you're part of the political process, you don't try and overthrow that political process. When you're part of the political process here in Hong Kong as part of China, that you don't try and overthrow Chinese sovereignty. If that's the new definition of patriotism, then it's a fairly low level of patriotism that's being expected, in my opinion.
Obviously, the 10 steps, for mutual destruction is not supposed to be the form of the representation of patriotism over there. Timothy.
Yeah, I mean, when you're proposing the destruction of the society, and not just proposing, but in many cases, obviously carrying out the destruction of the society, that obviously isn't a very patriotic act, and it's the sort of scenes that we saw in 2019 that are bringing on the requirement for this principle, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Huang Jing, what's your response to this kind of worry or concern? Or explain to us, whether the efforts to improve the electoral system somehow will undermine the one country, two systems?
I think that, like I said, the original one, the one that inherited from the colonial period, really does not fit for the one country, two system arrangement. So this kind of improvement is to make this electoral system more feasible or suitable for the current situation. One thing I want to add is that the patriotism essentially is based on a definition of a citizen's responsibility and commitment to sovereignty, as one of your guests just pointed out. Without that, anything is up to the air. So if you really want to defend the Hong Kong system as it is, you have to first and foremost defend China's sovereignty over Hong Kong. Without that, nothing is really meaningful.
Well, Carrie Lam, the chief executive of Hong Kong, said that mainland officials once told her that it's a word worth $1,000 to include the vision of ministries or provinces and cities in the country's 5-year plan. The 14th 5-year plan involves more than 500 words supporting Hong Kong. So, He Jing, obviously, this is not only about this legal issue in terms of the policy on Hong Kong from the central government. It is also about supporting Hong Kong to be more prosperous, more stable, to be the center of international finance and also logistics, etc. So, what impact will Hong Kong be, included in the 14th 5-year plan, according to your experience and understanding?
I think my understanding is that it will be huge. I think probably many people outside China, when they read the news on the Western media, they were all thinking about all this, the quote-unquote, the destruction of democracies. People probably focus too much about this so-called political aspect about it. But many people probably ignored that actually the sort of the bigger future in terms of finance or economic development of Hong Kong. Hong Kong is a very integral of the entire southern China, not just entire southern China. I mean the entire development, the future of the entire China and Asia. And it's probably the importance of the financial hub will not just remain stable, probably even can play a bigger role when China goes to the next level of development. So when Hong Kong is really big part of, it's an integral part of the 14th 5-year plan. So I think more opportunities may be coming to Hong Kong. Just right now, there's too much probably the talk about a sort of political aspect. People probably have not put enough focus on the economic prospect of Hong Kong.
Well, Timothy, on one hand, we can see the efforts from the central governments and also the Hong Kong governments, to improve the electoral system, to provide more stability, more predictability. On the other hand, you can see the central government is trying its best to help Hong Kong to develop, financially, economically, logistically, etc. So, what's your overall understanding of the prospect of the future of Hong Kong?
Well, I think with the right attitude in mind, the prospects for the future of Hong Kong can be quite bright. This is still one of the most vibrant areas in the world economically. It's the neighboring Greater Bay Area region as a whole is one of the most dynamically developing places that you can possibly be. The only thing standing in the way of Hong Kong's development is the attitude of certain people who are kind of determined for this system not to work. Kind of determined to throw up roadblocks and obstacles in the way. And all it's going to take is a shift in certain people's attitudes, and there's no limit to the possibilities for Hong Kong's future development in partnership with the neighboring regions of China.
Thank you, Timothy, from Hong Kong. Now we turn to the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken's first major foreign policy speech. In it, Blinken outlined how American diplomacy will carry out President Biden's foreign policy strategy and highlighted the China-U.S. relationship as the biggest geopolitical test of the 21st century. What are the prospects for better relations, and can cooperation replace competition between the two countries? Well, Secretary of State Blinken said, China represented America's biggest geopolitical test of the 21st century. He Jing, it's give you the impression that the new administration in Washington is actually continuing the policy, at least toward China, the policy of the Trump government. Is that the case?
No, I don't think so. I think that a major difference between the Biden administration and the previous Trump administration in that even though although both of them see China as a very serious challenge or competitor to the United States, but Biden tried to approach China from a multilateral point of view. In other words, Biden's administration paid more attention to the position of the allies in their approach towards China, vis-a-vis China. But the Trump administration, of course, is America first, is a unilateral approach. In that regard, I think Biden will be, in my view, more compromising, because by very nature of multilateralism, compromise is a core part of it. Having said that, of course, doesn't mean that Biden will take any easy approach towards China. As Blinken said, still see China as the most serious competitor. However, if Biden put his action where his mouth is, that is, to approach China from a multilateral point of view, then there will be more areas, more fields that cooperation will be more important than competition. The areas such like climate change, non-proliferation, and so on and so forth, and Iran nuclear issue and so on. And moreover, if Biden really takes allies' position, the interest into his heart in dealing with China, it will have to compromise with allies. We do know that different countries, even though they're allies towards each other, different countries have different approaches, different interests vis-a-vis China, which means Biden will have to make a compromise in a much larger scale and in much deeper, in a much depth. In that regard, I think it is good for both the United States and China, because both countries are global powers, connected, deeply connected to the same world.
Mm-hmm. Well, the White House interim national security strategic guidance, the documents, which is interim one, as we said, says, by restoring U.S. credibility and reasserting forward-looking global leadership, we will ensure that America, not China, sets the international agenda. So, Professor, Gregory, that's kind of quite assertive or even aggressive in terms of the competition with China. What's your take on that?
I think there are a couple of points. I agree with the previous comments, but I would frame it a little more directly and say that the biggest geopolitical test of the century is not China's rise, but America's decline. I think you'll be hard-pressed to find another major power in history that has risen as peacefully as China has over the last several decades. And I think that, I think we're all optimistic and wishful that the U.S. could decline as gracefully, but that hasn't been the case. Now, that's really the point that we're in now, is that the U.S. is in a period of relative, if not absolute, decline. And this is in the midst of a number of intersecting domestic and global crises that puts incredible pressure on the United States to compete, but also cooperate. And I think that this is going to be the main challenge as we move forward. Again, it is an incredible note of progress that Biden has abandoned Trump's unilateralism, but he really had no choice. The U.S. has come to the understanding that it has to work with others to advance its agenda. So I think that there's always this desire in Biden and his generation that took for granted American power, American hegemony. There's this sort of impulse to try to return to that. Certainly the rhetoric, but I think there's a reality that the United States needs to engage proactively, that it can no longer really impose its will as it did in the past. And if that's what progress looks like, then let's embrace it.
Mm-hmm. Well, Secretary Blinken also said, China was the only country that could seriously challenge the stable and open international system, as we said from our previous speakers. The China's response, let's take a look. The Foreign Affairs spokesperson said, China will always uphold the UN-centered international system and the international order. We will firmly safeguard is the one founded on international law, not the one defined by individual countries for the purpose of holding onto their hegemony. So the spokesperson also said, we are living in an era of globalization. No one and no country will end well by forming ideology-driven cliques to target others. So He Jin, what do you make of the Chinese stance? China is trying to avoid confrontation or even fierce competition from Washington. Is that the case?
Yeah, I think I want to make 2 points here. If you're looking at all the speeches, right, from both sides, we're looking at like a Biden speech in Munich Security Conference. One thing that he was talking about, like security, okay. Also, that's the same word. In today's world, the security, appears everywhere in the major politicians' speech. Health security, climate security, or cyber security. Now look, if you really want to accomplish security, you don't want to make more like enemies or even rivals. You really want to work together, engage with each other. I think naturally or inevitably, the U.S. China will have to find more ways to collaborate. Regardless of what happened in the Trump administration or even earlier years, all these major governments have to really work together if they really want the security. Okay, that's the first part. The second part, if we really looking at what our government is doing, even in terms of the trade agreements, China is now talking about seriously, genuinely talking about the possibility of joining CPTPP. The T is actually not really trade. If you really looking at that treaty, that agreement is comprehensive and progressive, trans-Pacific partnership. Now, it touches everything about the trade, state-owned company, and tariff, intellectual property, labor, everything. And then it really goes beyond the WTO or traditional trade-based agreements. I think our government's really working hard. It's looking really ahead. What more, big policy issues should be or included in all this bilateral or multinational talks. I think our government, China is really working hard to be more influential and be more responsive a partner in the whole world in the new global affairs. I think that's a big job. And there's something new to, probably to our side. Not totally new, but that definitely has a bigger job ahead given the kind of global challenges we are facing.
Mm-hmm. Well, Huang Jing, roughly 9 in 10 U.S. adults, according to a recent survey, to consider China as a competitor or enemy rather than a partner. What do you make of this, the results of the survey and what China and the U.S. can do or should do, at least like a people-to-people exchange to make this relationship more stable?
I think one should not really be surprised by this kind of result of survey because given the past few years, the Western media and the mainstream media in the United States has been bombarding China, trying to demonize China as really a kind of a bad country. I think that obviously have some impact or effect on ordinary American people's view on China. But we have to distinguish between, because this survey did not really make a distinction between what Americans view on China as a nation state or China as a people. And therefore, it really does not tell us anything. But if we take this survey seriously, I think first and foremost, the two governments should realize a kind of two greatest peoples on earth, if they really take such a bad view against each other, it's not really a good thing, it's a bad thing, because what can be more damaging than hatred against each other? I think that's why I think that anyone with a sense of responsibility and a sense of future in both governments, the Chinese and the American alike, should take it seriously that although the two countries or two nations are serious competitors down the road, does not mean that the two people should hate each other and take each other as an enemy, because that will have a long-term, very damaging impact, not only just on the two relationship between the two countries and two peoples, but to the entire world. So that's why I think that it is easier, maybe, for policymakers or politicians to try to demonize the other side. But in the long run, that would be very self-destructive on both sides.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Huang Jing. Let's leave there for now and take a look at this week's Newsmaker. Well, pineapple. The Customs Authority from the mainland basically issued a ban on the pineapple from Taiwan. So He Jing, why did the mainland decided to ban the pineapple from the island?
I think it's a quantity law. From what we have heard from the press report. Reportedly, it's really because of the bugs. It's hard to pronounce that name, but it's a kind of the bugs in the pineapple. Apparently, the inspection results wasn't really good. I also saw some reports from the Taiwan news that apparently such a situation has been for a while. Before, it was just returned. I mean, the cargo of the pineapple was returned if the bugs was found. But apparently, the recent result was not really good, did not really meet the legal requirement. That's why the government imposed a ban, from what we have heard.
Mm-hmm. Well, He Jing, if you look at Taiwan's exports, the total of the export is about more than 345 billion. Its exports of pineapples to the mainland were reportedly earning about $0.05 billion, or 0.02% of the total. It's the minimum. But if you look at the response or the reaction from the authorities over there, you can see the government is making a big fuss over something. It's really minimum between the two sides. Why?
I think there are several reasons. First and foremost, of course, the one who produce pineapples are the major supporters of the current DDP government. It's really because even though the export of pineapple to mainland China is a very, very small part of total export to China, but the one who produce it is very concentrated to be the supporters of DDP, the first reason. So that, from their point of view, that's really, really bad. Secondly, I think is that they try to take some advantage by highly politicize this, what I say as a very minimum and technical issue. Just like He Jing just said, it's because the pineapple has a lot of bugs in it. So they try to politicize this issue so that they can have some political gains on the island. Last but not the least, of course, if you look at the current government on Taiwan, they ban almost everything from mainland China. You can name a long, long list of the things that ban from mainland China, while they try, like you said, export everything to mainland China. Mainland China has become the major sources of trade, benefits. So they in Chinese would say, you think the others also behave like them. That's why they try to give a political explanation of this very technical views. Because if you try to ban everything from the other side, then you'd assume the other side would do the same to you, and that's, to me, is a little bit laughable.
Mm-hmm. Well, adding to that, of course, at the beginning of this pandemic in Wuhan last year, many people still remember probably, unpleasantly, the Taiwan side had, banned this export of masks to the mainland. So that's something not really, well, experienced by the people. With that, we're coming to the end for today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also watch us on the CGTN app or on YouTube. I'm Xu Jinduo. You can find me on Twitter, Xu Jinduo, one word. Thanks for watching. See you next week.